the St. Peter League of Women Voters Candidate Forum featuring the candidates for the Minnesota House District 19A. Kim Spears, a Republican candidate, and Jeff Brand, the DFL candidate. And they have kindly given me permission, since I've known both of them for years, to say Jeff and Kim. So I hope it's okay with you guys. My name is Diane Norland. I'm a member of the St. Peter League of Women Voters. We are your hosts this evening. Please silence your cell phones if you didn't hear Lynn. If you wish to record this forum, please do it from one side or the other so as not to distract others in the audience. Our forum is being recorded in its entirety and will be broadcast on St. Peter Public Access TV and in the Mankato area on KTV. The League of Women Voters is a local, state, and national nonpartisan volunteer group. We encourage informed and active participation of citizens in government and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Our event tonight is designed to create the opportunity to educate the voters about the relevant views of the candidates. The League of Women Voters membership is open, yes, to men as well, to all. And we would welcome the opportunity to visit with anybody who is interested in joining us. Members are present here tonight and available to visit with you about membership. Our candidates tonight will answer questions developed by the St. Peter League of Women Voters with our co-hosts, the St. Peter Herald and the St. Peter Chamber of Commerce. In addition, we have received questions from the public prior to this forum. We will also take questions from the audience. Please raise your hands and the usher will provide you with a 3x5 card. No League of Women Voter members active with any candidate's campaign participated in planning candidate forums. Thank you to Ed Lee with the Chamber. Where's Ed Lee? Behind you. Oh dear. Oh, there. Okay. Ed Lee with the Chamber and Helen Baumgartner with the St. Peter League, and Harriet Mason. The League of Women Voters does screen the questions we receive. We may rephrase, combine, or eliminate questions to avoid duplications. Questions will not be asked if they are of a personal nature and not relevant to the office, or if they were designed only to make a statement rather than to solicit information. Our intention in screening questions is to select questions that represent the interests of the persons who submitted the questions. Please contact the candidates directly after the forum for any questions that have not been presented or if you feel that an issue has not been adequately addressed. The two candidates, again, I doubled up the paragraphs. Two candidates again are Kim Spears, a Republican candidate, Jeff Brand, DFL candidate for the House District Seat 19A. We look forward to a respectful learning experience. The candidates are expected to honor time limits. We ask that the audience remain as quiet as you can during the forum to avoid disruption and to facilitate our broadcast. Each candidate will introduce himself with a short statement of 2 minutes, and our timers are nasty. So just be prepared. You stop in mid-word. Okay. All right. We will start our introductions with Jeff, and then Kim will proceed first with the closing comments. I will read the questions. As I said, each candidate is given 2 minutes to respond to questions. I will alternate the order of response so that each candidate can go first. The candidates each have the opportunity to offer a 30-second rebuttal to 3 questions if they choose. And Lynn, you have the rebuttal cards. Somebody's got the rebuttal cards. You got the rebuttal cards. All right. Excellent. All right. And candidates will be allowed 2 minutes for a closing statement. Okay. All right. Our first question.
No, our opening statements.
Thank you. Okay, our opening statements. And Jeff, you go first.
Fantastic. Thank you to the Chamber first and foremost for co-hosting, and also the League of Women Voters, and also the St. Peter Herald for being a co-host as well. So thank you for doing this. My name is Jeff Brand, and I am your DFL candidate for the Minnesota House of Representatives for District 19A. I have to admit it feels a little bit weird being up here because 2 years ago, and way beyond that, I was in the audience just like you're in the audience tonight. So enjoy it. A little bit of background about myself. I grew up in rural Howard Lake in a dairy situation. I grew up in a dairy. After I graduated from high school, I ended up going to Vermilion Community College to become a park ranger. Did that for a little while, decided that was something that maybe I didn't want to do for the rest of my life. Happened to meet my wife at the time, and she brought me down here to Mankato, so blame her or thank her, as the case may be. I'm a father. I'm a husband. By the way, happy 11th anniversary tomorrow as well. I also am fortunate enough to be a 2-time city council member here in St. Peter, and I enjoy that a lot. And I've been fortunate enough to also be a board member for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and advocate on behalf of all of Greater Minnesota for the past 3 years at the Capitol. As I door knock across this district, I hear overwhelmingly the issues are education, healthcare, and transportation. And those are the issues I'm running on. I support families. Those issues are germane to families, and I want to make sure that families are taken care of in the state of Minnesota. And so tonight, I look forward to having a great conversation. Please ask questions. I always implore people to do that as part of democracy. It's asking questions and figuring out how best we should move forward for Minnesota. Thank you.
Kim.
I also would like to thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity, as well as you for attending and participating in our democracy. I have served on the North Mankato City Council for 4 years. I'd never anticipated on doing that before, but the reason that I did it was they were raising our property taxes quite a bit at that time, and I thought it was unsustainable. And so I got interested. I started attending the city council meetings. For 2 years, I attended them with perfect attendance, studied the packets, provided my feedback when I needed to, and I believe I made a difference. It was that experience that encouraged me to actually run for office to represent the people of North Mankato. I found once I got on the city council, I found out that there's a lot more to what we need to do than just taxes by themselves. There are a lot of issues, a lot of concerns that people have. We need to make sure that we keep the quality of life that we've been given. Some people, or I thought one of the questions would be, why are you running for this office? Because that's one that I get at the door quite frequently. The reason that I run for this office is because I'm privileged to live in a great district, in a great state, in the greatest country in the world. And my experience and the observations that I've made since I've become politically aware, because before attending those council meetings, I was not very politically aware, but I worry about the fact that what's made this country great, the virtues and the values are not there anymore. We're losing those. So I feel that I need to do my part to make sure that those values are retained.
Thank you. We will now begin with the questions, right? Right. Okay, the first question. What steps do you propose to make certain that all Minnesotans have affordable and accessible health care? And we will start with Jeff.
No.
With Kim. Oh, on the question. Okay. With Kim.
In regards to healthcare, what has to be done is the costs have to be controlled. The one step that has actually been started in the legislature is cost transparency. It's impossible to control costs if you don't know what they are. And so we need to do that. Another factor would be to give people a stake in their basic health care, the basic maintenance, the day-to-day health care. At work, I have something called an HSA, which is a health savings account. And what that provides me, it provides me with a little pot of money that I have control over and that I can decide how that's spent. So obviously, I'm going to be very careful with that. You know, it rolls over, and I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to pay attention to the costs that are out there, and I think that will help drive costs down. And then a third option would be to, and we've also started that in the Minnesota legislature as well, is to have like health cooperatives. We've started that for the farmers where they can actually buy, they can group themselves together and buy group insurance so they can get the rates that are not available for individuals. We need to open that up possibly to churches, to community organizations as well, to make sure that people can have affordable health care.
Thank you, Kim. Jeff?
When I'm at the doors talking to folks, this is the biggest issue, and I always thought that education would be the biggest issue. But first and primarily, I get a lot of people at the door who want to talk specifically about health care. I am reminded of a woman that came to the door in North Mankato a few months ago, and I started talking to her about who I was and why I'm running, and I told her that I had an interest in talking to people about health care. Immediately she started crying. She's one of 5 women in the world that have a form of cancer that is very rare, and because of it, her health insurance doesn't cover it. She's literally bankrupt because of her health. We live in the richest world in the country, and I'm sorry, but that is not tolerable. We have to be right with the fact that health care is not something for the privileged few that are wealthy. It has to be for everyone. And so when I go up to the Minnesota legislature, I'm going to be working well across the aisles with both sides. And I'm going to be working on an idea that's been floated by Kathy Sharon and Clark Johnson a few years back, and it's called the Minnesota Care Buy-In. Now that's been proposed for several years. Governor Dayton supported it, so does candidate Tim Walz, and I think that's an important first step in talking more about health care. The problem is for the last few years, there hasn't even been one single hearing on the issue. And I think that this year in this election, it's a referendum on poor leadership and their inability to listen to what the people in the state of Minnesota require. Second step with health care, this Minnesota Care Buy-In actually is supported by the Minnesota Farmers Union because they believe that farmers across this great state of Minnesota are impacted the most by health care. You go west of town, there's somebody that's paying $40,000 per year for their health care and $15,000 for their deductible. If they need to use the stuff, that's not tolerable. Not in this state, not going forward. Thank you.
All right, the second question is on the environment. There are actually 2 part of this. So the first question is, how would you address the competing concerns for environment and jobs? And we will start with Jeff.
I lived up in northern Minnesota for 5 years. I lived in Ely while I went to school to Vermillion Community College. I also spent some time in the Boundary Waters being a canoe guide for River Point Resort and working, and being privileged enough to have a canoe or a kayak, and 5 miles away there was the Boundary Waters, and that was a great time. In the state of Minnesota right now, we've seemed to have this issue that's creeping up, this idea that we can't have mining jobs because of the environment, and we can't have the environment because we need the mining jobs. And when I'm elected to the Minnesota legislature, I guess my biggest goal is I'm going to try to get both sides to the table, because I think there are more things that we can work together on that are dividing us right now. Those mining jobs are really important for the state of Minnesota for a variety of reasons. And so when I'm talking to folks at the legislature, I want to make sure 2 things are important. First of all, if there's a mining disaster it's not going to impact the watershed that goes into Lake Superior, and it doesn't go into the Boundary Waters canoe area. The second thing is, if something like that does happen, I don't want to be on the hook for it. I don't want future generations to be on the hook for it. I want them to be on the hook for it, so they can't leave the state, call bankruptcy, and reorganize as some other multinational conglomeration. I do think that there are mining jobs in Minnesota that are important, but I also look to the importance of having recreational jobs up there, up north. The towns of Ely, the community of Grand Marais, those are both gateways to the Boundary Waters canoe area, and they do provide jobs. Albeit they are not full-time jobs, most of them are not full-time jobs. But I think that if we were to allow more introduction to broadband internet service up north in the northeastern part of the state, we have the ability to build new jobs and have new factories and new call centers and other jobs filter into that area that will also produce worthwhile jobs and build the quality of life in the northeastern Minnesota that we require.
Kim, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I have it.
Okay.
I don't know of anyone in Minnesota that doesn't care about our environment. The farmers care, the business owners care, we all care. When we run into a situation like the Enbridge pipeline, there's a pipeline there, and it is degrading, and if we don't do something about that, then it will cause an environmental problem. Now, Enbridge is willing to put a new pipeline in there. Technology has come a long way in that regard, and so that new pipeline is going to be much safer and last longer than the one that was in there. So I believe that standing in the way of something like that is actually environmentally unwise. We need to look at that. We need that oil currently for our economy, for our way of life, to keep energy costs low, because if we don't do that, it's the lower income people that pay as energy prices go up. It's a very regressive type thing. And so for the environment overall, it's technology, it's affluence. You know, to do things technologically correct takes money. So we need to make sure that our economy is going good so we can deal with these issues. And then if we don't do that, then we will be dealing with people with higher energy costs, and that will be a problem. It's the poor countries, you know, in third world countries, they're not concerned about the environment, you know, because they're just living hand to mouth. We can take care of our environment, and we have. You know, our world right now is cleaner than it has been in a long time. You know, there's been periods in our history where it's been a lot worse. So I think we're moving in the right direction. We need to be good stewards, but we can't just, because we have one agenda. All right.
Can I use a rebuttal?
Yes.
Okay. Do I get a punch?
Lynn?
All right, let's
You
do this.
get,
All right.
How many seconds?
30, he gets 30.
30 seconds rebuttal.
The only thing I would say about the Enbridge pipeline is this. As a legislator, you will have to respect the rights and the privileges that everybody has. And I would also recognize the folks that live up there that are indigenous and their rights to exist and their rights to be sovereign and their rights to be heard as well. And I feel like those rights have been trampled upon.
Thank you. Follow-up question, and we'll start with Kim. Where do you stand on the Polymet mine in northern Minnesota?
Again, as far as the environment goes, we cannot, we need to be concerned about our economy and what we need to do to maintain our quality of life overall. Those minerals do impact our economy up there particularly, but all over our country. It actually contributes to our competitiveness in the world. And again, I'll repeat what I said before, is the fact that technology is the solution to this. Okay, I agree with Jeff that we need to make sure that the safeguards are in place for that to proceed. But there's been vetting for years and years now. There's been environmental impact studies, and it's been clearing all of those hurdles. So in the case that it clears all of those hurdles, I believe that it should move forward.
Jeff?
So the Polymet mine itself is located just south of Ely. And primarily where that would be located is a place called the Cowishiwi watershed, which does flow directly into the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. The Cowishiwi is an Ojibwe word, which, you know, when I lived up there, I learned it was, I think, the space in between. So that does have some cultural significance up there. When I lived up there, I worked at a place called River Point Resort, which happens to be at the mouth, or the mouth of the Cowishiwi River as it flows out of Birch Lake. Birch Lake is about a 19-mile lake where there's great walleye fishing. People recreate with their houseboats between Babbitt and Ely. A lot of people leave River Point Resort every year to go into the Boundary Waters Canoe Area. I also realize that there are a lot of people that are looking for jobs in Ely right now, and a lot of people who have left Ely specifically because they can't find good paying jobs. And so they leave, and they leave their family and their heritage, and they leave and go down to the Twin Cities or somewhere else where they can find a job, maybe Duluth. It's a very complex issue, and I really can't say that I have all of the answers, and I don't think anybody can say they have all the answers themselves. But I think we do need to take a hard look at what we need, and if we need wind turbines, if we need renewable energy, we also have to realize that that requires copper, and those require some of these minerals as well. And so I'm not sure where we get these minerals, if we get them from Minnesota, or if we get them outsourced. I'm not sure the whole entire process, but I do know that I am not interested in destroying a protected area that's been protected in the state for a number of years in order to get something out of it that has a short-term gain. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is on transportation. Last week, Nicollet County Commissioner candidates all highlighted the need for state funding for local roads and bridges. How would you address their concerns? And we start with Jeff.
Yes, transportation is a large issue. It's not something that's germane to being a city council member. It's also something that I've been tackling for the last 3 years at the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. I sit on the transportation subcommittee at the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and so we meet and we talk about ways that we can work across the aisles and work with both parties and both the House and the Senate to try to find solutions that work well for transportation in Minnesota. I'll be honest with you, we haven't had an adequate amount of transportation funding since the recession. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of projects that have been put to the wayside that we do need to invest in, including Highway 14. Highway 14 is the biggest transportation issue in our district. It's also a matter of safety and security of people that are driving to and from work, traveling to and from school, and driving their goods to and from hubs of commerce. You know, between Nicollet and New Ulm is a very important and vital part of that Highway 14 corridor as people travel from New Ulm to Rochester. It also is an expensive stretch, but if you look at what happened between Nicollet and North Mankato, there has been a dramatic decrease in the amount of deaths and serious accidents after that was put into a 4-lane highway. And so I'm looking to do the same thing when I go up to the legislature, 4 lanes from Nicollet to New Ulm. I also realize that it's important that we work on county roads and township roads as well, because that's the first mile that those grain trucks haul their grain to market from. And so it's really important that those roads are taken care of as well. The bottom line is I do look forward to working with folks across the aisle on transportation because we all need it. Multimodal transportation is really a thing of the future. And I look forward to working with Jack Kolars at the Nicollet County government and also Vance Sternberg at Blue Earth County because those folks have put a lot of time and effort into transportation in this area.
Thank you. Kim?
Well, you won't get any argument from me that Highway 14 needs to be done. I think we're all in agreement that it's kind of a nonpartisan issue. It's been decades that's been on the planning board. I think something that we may lose sight of is there are other highways that are, that are a danger in our state as well, but we should get that one done. Another thing on the county roads is there's County Road 12. It's flooded. Right now, we can't seem to get cooperation between our state agencies to figure out what to do about that. We got some conflict between the DNR and the Department of Transportation and the county to try to resolve that issue. We need to get our agencies to work together on this. We do have, I do believe we have adequate funding streams. We've got bonding that we can do when we need to do particular projects, but it's the prioritization and it's the cooperation between our agencies that we need right now to get these projects done.
Thank you. An additional question that links to this one. Do you support a gas tax or a modified gas tax for this situation? And we'd start with Kim.
I do not support a gas tax. I think we can find the funding to do what we need to do. Our state in certain areas wastes a lot of money, and if we were able to apply that, again, it's all needs to be reallocated. We need to find the proper way to do that. But if we could eliminate a lot of waste, I think we could get a lot more projects done.
Jeff?
Yeah, I'd like to address that. I have a minute and a half, right, for this answer as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to address that. Before I do that, though, I do want to say this. I've talked to the county engineer, Seth Greenwood. I've talked to John Lupke, who's the county commissioner out there on County Road 12. I've talked to the DNR, and I've talked to MnDOT, and I'll tell you what, right now, when somebody puts out a video saying that nobody's working together and everybody's working against each other, that makes for some ill will amongst people that are the stakeholders in this issue. And I will tell you that they are working very well together, and they are trying to find a solution that's equitable in terms of not costing the taxpayers too much money, by the same time taking care of this situation as fast as possible. So I think that's a little extreme to say that nobody's working together. Now, to address this gas tax issue, I do support a gas tax increase if it's moderate. I do think that that will provide about half of the necessary funding to backfill the $600 million in additional transportation dollars that we need to fund in the state of Minnesota each year. And I will tell you that anybody that doesn't look at the gas tax needs to find a way to find $600 million. And if that's what Kurt Doubt mentioned 2 years ago when he said starving the general fund to pay for transportation, I'm not on board with that. I'm just not. I look for alternative solutions, and the legislature's done a really good job in 2015 in a bipartisan way at looking at the electric vehicle tax as a way to help backfill some of that transportation dollars from the folks that aren't paying gas that are plugging in and driving their hybrids down the road. And I look forward to alternatives, and I look forward to working with as many different people and different stakeholders on this issue as we can.
The next question. Okay. The next question has to do with taxes and finance. And there will be two parts if we have time, and I think we do. So the first question, and we will start with Jeff. Please describe your long-range plan on economic equality in regards to the Twin Cities metro area and greater Minnesota.
As I'm running for the Minnesota House of Representatives, I also wear that hat, the hat of a city council member. And the hat that also is the hat of the board member for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. And I know that some folks want to cast seeds of doubt that there is this divide, this mythical divide that exists between metro and rural Minnesota. But I will tell you there are many metro folks that live up there that are legislators that do want to work with us in the rural area. And I'm glad to hear that, and I look forward to working with them. I think when we work up there at the legislature, and we're a Coalition of Greater Minnesota folks, so about 93 cities across the state of Minnesota are working with Republicans and working with Democrats. They realize what the issues are. They realize what impacts us. And by the same token, I mean, how many of you have children that grew up here but live in the Twin Cities now? And somehow there's some sort of a divide that's going on, and I don't understand how that works. I believe that Tim Walz is the perfect candidate for governor because he talks about one Minnesota. And I believe in that one Minnesota plan, and I think anybody who's running for the Minnesota House of Representatives needs to pay attention to that idea of a one Minnesota, where nobody's cast to the side and everybody's working together in a coalition. As far as a long-term economic way, I feel strong that part of that is the local government aid formula, which is part of the reason that from 2008 on, property taxes have increased in our county and counties across the state of Minnesota. In fact, we get a local government aid number that's less than what we received in communities across the state in 2002. And so I plan to at least address that issue as part of a larger package to work on a widespread economic impact across the state.
Kim?
I don't think anybody wants to cast anyone aside. I think that we just need to look for equity in some of these particular areas. I'm glad you brought up LGA. LGA was originally intended to provide a buffer or provide some support for smaller cities or smaller towns in rural Minnesota. Why does Minneapolis and why does St. Paul need LGA? It goes completely against the whole idea of that. And there is a little bit of a divide. I mean, they have to, it seems like the cities have to have everything that's designed for the small towns and small cities in the rural area, and it just defeats the purpose of all of those things. And I do believe it distorts the equity of what we need out here, and in favor of things that the cities need. Naturally, we need the cities, okay? That's the core of our state. But we need I think we all agree that we need our rural areas and our small towns and cities out in the outlying areas as well. And they need to be vibrant and they need to be supported. It's kind of like our roads. Our roads are the circulation of the system. So the rural roads need to be taken care of as well as the cities. And I think that they glom onto a lot of the transportation dollars. I think some of those need to be distributed in the outlying areas as well. So we do need some equity balancing as well. And I'm not necessarily saying that we need to pit each other against each other, but I think that we need to look at these things in a balanced perspective.
Thank you, Kim.
Can I rebut to that, please?
Yes,
Thank you. So 30 seconds?
yes.
Okay, all right. So local government aid was established for the Minnesota Miracle a long time ago. And the only reason it got passed, the only reason that we actually have an equitable amount of resources across the state is because we needed Minneapolis and St. Paul and Duluth and Rochester to be a part of that. And I really think that if somebody wants to go up to the Capitol and start picking apart who gets what and how it gets distributed now, after 30 years of it working well across the state of Minnesota, I think that kind of bastardizes the idea that we have for local government aid.
I think I'll take a rebuttal to that one.
Okay.
Bastardizes. That is the job of the legislator, is to pick apart all this stuff. If you say that it works so well, then why are we complaining about the fact that it's been reduced? I mean, there's a definite pot of money there. It all has to be reapportioned. We have to take care of all of these concerns out of the tax money that we collect from our citizens. So, again, you have to look at the intent of this. Okay, maybe it wouldn't get passed if the cities weren't involved in that, but it still defeats the whole purpose of the idea. It's local government aid, and it was intended to help small cities and towns.
All right, the next question, and Kim, you will start. This year, the legislature failed to pass a tax conformity bill to account for the changes in the federal tax code. Many businesses saw increased profit, while many individuals paid more in income taxes. What do you want to change about the Minnesota tax system?
Well, I think we need to get the conformity done. It is probably the biggest thing right now. Obviously, I represent one set of values as far as the role of government and taxation and how big that should be. So I'm looking for cost savings, I'm looking for tax reductions if at all possible, but tax conformity would go a long way to that, I think. So really, that's all I have to say about that, is the fact that we should get in alignment with the federal government just to simplify things as much as possible.
Thank you. Jeff?
What a loaded question. I'm glad it was asked. I paid careful attention to this last legislative session because I threw my hat in the ring before the session started. And I will tell you, at the very end, when the things are getting in the thick of it, and they're working 14-hour nights and days, and they're trying to get things done, and they're trying to get things done in a bipartisan way, I really think it's amazing, dare I say awe-inspiring, that leadership would decide to play chicken with the governor on an issue in such a bipartisan fashion as tax conformity. All they had to do was pass the bill as it was, and the governor would have signed it. He even said so. He was asking for this to get passed by the Senate and the House. And then they threw a whole bunch of garbage into the bill and then said, we dare you to veto this bill. And guess what? He played goalkeeper and vetoed the bill. And I think that he did a great job, and I applaud him for his efforts on doing that. As far as changing our tax system, I think the first thing we need to do on 2019, once elected, is we have to readdress the tax conformity bill that was not passed in 2018. And I hope that both parties have something ready to go, or at least after this election, the ruling party has something that we can work together. Or maybe if it's two-party system, we can actually work in a bipartisan way, which I encourage a lot of the time, to get this stuff passed. Because this tax conformity bill is going to come back in 2019, and I guarantee you anybody that's elected to the legislature is going to have their email boxes pounded with emails saying, why didn't you pass this last year? Why didn't you do something? And I think it's really important that we address this right away in 2019 and make it retroactive to 2018.
Thank you. The next question, the topic is education. What steps might the legislature take to assure equitable, quality public education for all children, pre-K through grade 12? And Jeff, we will begin with you.
Education is really important to me. I'm the first in my family to get a four-year education. And I think that's really important because that afforded me the opportunities I have today by getting that opportunity to go to college. Isabel just went to first grade a few weeks ago, and Leo went to preschool. And we spend a lot of money on preschool because we realize the benefits that our child sees going to school and learning how to be more socially interactive at an early age and learn the building blocks that are necessary for kindergarten readiness. You know, when we talk about education, it's really important that we fully fund our educational system. And I think that it's really something that, it's just amazing. I read the Star Tribune article today from another legislator claiming that the Republicans are very good at taking care of and addressing the education in Minnesota. But when you actually look at it, the per pupil formula has actually decreased since 2003. And so that means class sizes are growing. Schools are having to make harder decisions about what programs they keep and what programs they cut. And that's the reality here in Minnesota, and nobody should tell you any different. Go talk to Dr. Paul Peterson if you don't believe me. Go talk to Dr. Allen at District 77 if you don't believe me. Go talk to any district professional across the state of Minnesota, and they'll tell you they could use more resources. And I think it's really important. I don't really, as a parent, I think it's important that our teachers have the right resources for our schools, and that we're also addressing safety issues in our schools. Now, you saw in the newspaper yesterday, in the Mankato Free Press, they gave out some grants for safety in our schools, and I think that's just a first step. But we can't rest our laurels on that. We need to keep moving Minnesota forward in terms of funding our schools and making them safer. Thank you.
Kim?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. What steps might the legislature take to assure equitable, quality public education for all children pre-K through 12, grade
Okay.
12?
Well, we do need to provide for education. It is a state constitutionally mandated function of our government. We need to have efficient schools. I believe efficiency is the word that's used in the Constitution. I don't believe that necessarily money is the answer, because we spend $1,000 more per pupil in the cities than we do in our areas down here. And yet we still have continuous disparities as far as the education goes. We don't seem to be able to resolve that problem. It doesn't get better the more we spend on it. I think the issue is that one size doesn't fit all necessarily. I mean, when you have a centralized public school system, you have a basic centralized curriculum, and I don't think that necessarily works well for everyone. And so I would like to see more choices. I think I'd like to see some charter schools. We need to, if we really want a quality education for our children, we need to put all options on the table. We need to do some things differently than we've been doing them before. And I think some alternatives to what we've been doing would be good in this case.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is on immigration and the workforce. In reference to our workforce, what are your views on attracting and maintaining an immigrant population in southern Minnesota? Kim, you go
Okay.
first. Sorry.
Well, I think we're doing a sufficient job of attracting immigration or immigrants into our state. I don't really see any shortage in that regard. As far as workforce goes, I think we need to make sure that they are able to function within our society. I think that they need to, we need to make sure that they start learning English. We need to start make sure that they learn our ways of life and how to, how to drive, how to navigate our society. And I think that will help our workforce situation a lot. So as far as what we need to do more to attract them, I think we're doing quite enough in that regard.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thanks for asking the question. In Minnesota, we have a very low unemployment rate, and we do have a lot of jobs that are going unmet across the state by skilled workers. And I believe this is an opportunity for us to look at welcoming more folks into our communities in order to fill those jobs, in order to make those manufacturers more successful so they can continue to grow their businesses and innovate and create new inventions. The fact of the matter is we've got a situation in our country, and it's not just in our state, where there's a lot of changing demographics. Now we can either get in the way of that, which I think is unhealthy, or we can be welcoming to that, just as we are in St. Peter, a welcoming community where we have populations of Somali immigrants who become citizens in the United States. Also our Hispanic folks that are in our community as well that are becoming citizens as well. I think we've got some Hispanic folks in our community that are in the shadows. And I believe that that is because they are not able to get jobs because they don't have the ability to become citizens. And I think we ought to have allowed more folks that are DACA recipients the opportunity to become U.S. citizens. I think we ought to allow more people who are here already that are contributing to our tax base, who are contributing to our communities, to become workers that someday might even have their own businesses and hire folks in our communities as well. The fact of the matter is that we live in a nation of immigrants. We live in a pluralistic, multinational country. And we should always be welcoming to folks. And we should always be looking towards the future to meet the needs of the people here right now.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, the next question is on wages, right to work, minimum wage. And we start with Jeff. Would you support a statewide $15 an hour minimum wage? Why?
Just that question, or are we talking about all of them?
Let's go with just that.
And then we'll follow with the other ones.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the state of Minnesota back in 2009, or 2000, I'm sorry, that was, my dates are wrong, 2012, there was talk about minimum wage, there was talk about the need to increase it, and there were a lot of people that were saying, if we do this, we're going to lose jobs, we're going to lose employers in the state. And it wasn't until the legislature passed the new minimum wage in 2014 and escalating into the future that we would have a minimum wage that would increase over time. Now, I have to say that I don't think we've lost any employers. In fact, I think we are in a situation where we need more employees, and as a result of that, we're in a situation with low employment that wages are starting to grow. I talked to John Considine III over at Greater Mankato Growth a few weeks ago when I was at the RETA meeting here in town at Gustavus Adolphus College. That's Regional Economic Development Alliance meeting. And he suggested that the local news outlets aren't reporting that there has been an increase in labor rates in the area. Yet we're still in a situation where, though there's been an increase in labor rates, people are still not able to meet the basic needs on a one-income family. In fact, if you make $10 per hour in the state of Minnesota, you can't actually even own your own apartment in town by yourself. In Nicollet County and Blue Earth County, across southern Minnesota, you need to have a better than $10 an hour job. And if you've got kids, you can't have a second job because you've got to raise kids too. And that really puts a burden on families. And so I do suggest that we look at the minimum wage and we continue to discuss the minimum wage, because that's an important way to make people give the opportunity to succeed. And frankly, with this minimum wage, I know in Washington State they have a $15 minimum wage. And I don't know of anybody that's running around with their hair on fire as a result of that. So it's working, and that's just one case where it's working. I'm not sure if it'll work in Minnesota, but let's at least have the dialogue on that at the legislature.
Thank you, Jeff. Kim?
I do not support a $15 hour minimum wage. Minimum wages, especially such a dramatic increase in the minimum wage, would actually wind up hurting the people that it's supposed to be helping in a large degree. It's fine if you're able to keep your job at $15 an hour, but there are going to be situations, and I don't think anyone can deny it, that people are going to lose their jobs. Business is business. It has to make money. For someone to be hired and to be retained, they have to produce $15 an hour worth of work. And I don't think in a lot of cases, I don't think in every case that's going to work. So it's going to be fine for the people that keep their job, but for that person that loses their job, it's going to be a big hardship. Yes, we have a social safety net for them, but I don't think that's what we want. I think work is important, not just from a financial aspect, but from a societal aspect, from a personal growth aspect, from just an identity aspect. I think, work gives us pride, work gives us purpose, work gives us a reason to get up in the morning. So if it costs jobs and it's hurting the lower income people, I don't think it's a good idea. And you say that nobody's running around with their hair on fire, but these people are underrepresented and they're down anyway. So you're not going to hear them running around with their hair on fire. They're just going to go quietly on their way and go quietly onto the welfare roll. So I definitely do not support a $15 an hour minimum wage.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about guns. There are a couple of questions about guns. What efforts would you support to decrease gun violence? And we will start with Kim.
Well, I would definitely use the tools that we have better than we do. We have a NIC system that is supposed to have the information in it to prevent people that have a criminal background or mental problems from getting firearms. And I've heard tales, well, actually, there's been a case where the military did not report a person that should have been on that system. So more laws, in this case, I don't think are going to do the job. We just have to make sure that we do enforce what we have. So that's one proposal. overall, we need to make sure that we are addressing mental health in our community, and we might want to look at identifying people that have issues a little bit better and make sure that they get on that system if they do have an issue in that regard. But I think a whole bunch more laws are not going to do what we need to do, not going to do what we want them to do.
Thank you, Kim. Jeff?
You know, Kim, I'm glad that you brought up the Southland shooting where the Air Force person gunned down people in a church because they didn't report that he was not fit to own a gun. Because I hope that means you also support universal background checks across the states and also in the military, because I do. When my wife told me yesterday that my daughter had to have an intruder drill at South Elementary School, in which the teacher was actually teaching my daughter to throw staplers and scissors and anything that comes at anybody that comes into the room as a way to defend themselves against somebody that's got a gun in my kid's school, you should just imagine how I felt. I felt this tall. And I'm not alone. I know many people that'll be listening and watching that feel this small when they hear about their first graders having to learn about this stuff. I'm all for safety in schools. I think one entry where you have to swipe your driver's license in order to get into the school, bare minimum every school across the state of Minnesota should have the resources where that's done tomorrow. Another thing I propose is that we get more social workers in schools. Because if we have more social workers in schools that can address students with behavioral and social issues early on, not only are we going to take care of the achievement gap that exists, because those social workers will be able to recommend behavior modification and psychiatry or psychiatric help, but also that might lessen violence in our schools. And I'm for doing that as well. Another thing is red flag laws. If I'm a husband and I exhibit danger signs where I'm going to hurt myself or hurt my kids or wife, anybody in this community should be able to go to the police department and tell them that I am a danger to myself and the rest of the community, including my kids and my wife. Those laws need to be passed, and I fully support those. I hope you guys do too, because I plan to work very hard on getting that done, and I need your help.
Thank you. And the next part of the issue, the question is, what is your view on the gun show loopholes? And we'll start with Jeff.
Okay. Gun shows exist in this state as a way for folks to sell firearms directly without having to go to a store. And so if I've got a pistol or a rifle or a shotgun and I'm done using it, I can actually go to a gun show and sell it. If I'm a licensed dealer, I can also sell firearms at these shows as well. And I believe that anybody that's selling a firearm to somebody else ought to meet the same standards across the board. I'm not asking for too much to make sure that a person that's selling a firearm and a person that's buying a firearm are legally and authorized to buy or possess a firearm. Now, this won't curb all the firearm and gun violence that exists, and it might not, it might be the only answer, but this is another answer when talking about gun violence. And so as a hunter myself, that have had guns passed down from my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, and I'm looking forward to someday passing to my daughter and son, I also have to realize that we need to make sure that those guns that are transferred are also done in a way that exhibits public safety as well.
Thank you, Jeff. Kim?
So what I hear is you want these transactions registered, a registry of these transactions. Well, I don't know if you've ever been to a gun show, but I've been to many gun shows. He's right, an individual person can sell a gun, and it's not a gun show thing, okay? I can sell, we could go out to my car right now and I could sell you a weapon right now that I own legally, it's fine, for licensed dealers there, it's just like going to a store. So you have to register, you have to have a permit to buy if you buy a pistol, and you have to go through the NICS system. You have to have your, background checked. So it's kind of a misnomer, the gun show loophole. This idea of, making private transactions go through this system, it's not going to work. The only thing that you're going to do is, legal citizens are going to do that, but the bad guys that are going to do bad things with guns are still going to do this, If they pass this law, you're still not going to stop these transactions. So I don't think these additional, we need to enforce the laws that we have. If bad people have guns, if bad people have guns, we need to arrest them, but more laws in this case are not going to do the job. I guess that's what I have to say about that.
Okay, thank you. The next question, is about elections. Before each election, voters receive electioneering communications, such as leaflets, postcards, and ads naming a specific candidate. What, if any, changes are needed in Minnesota law regarding campaign finance and public disclosure? And we'll start with Jeff, right?
Okay.
Right, yeah.
In the state of Minnesota, when a person wants to put together an ad, they have to make sure that they, I think, are putting forth the best effort to either highlight a person's positive policy or background. And I feel like there are a lot of ads, and it doesn't matter which candidate, but they seem to be pretty negative lately. Turn on the TV, there's ads against our governor candidates, there's ads against our Minnesota, our congressional folks as well. But also there's been plenty of negative ads against me, and you've probably seen a couple of them in the mailboxes lately. I think first and foremost, when a person's running for office, they need to realize that either it has to be truthful or they have to refute it. And I would call upon any candidate who's running for House to own up to the fact that either it's benefiting them or they have a duty or a right to say, this isn't right, and I condemn it and I refute it. And so I really appreciate the fact that our campaign finance board does a very good job of upholding the rules that are in place right now. They have to say at the bottom who's funding, or they have to say at the bottom who's paying for the ad. But where does the money come from? And how do you follow the trail? And how many of you know that there's a campaign finance board website where you can go and you can look at each candidate, you can see where the money comes from, or where the money's being spent for or against? Well, those resources do exist in the state of Minnesota. And I think that those folks do a fine job of maintaining those records, and by law enacted by the legislature. And so I continue to support those folks. I've run for enough offices now where those rules are important, and we must maintain them.
Thank you. Kim?
I think some of the material that comes out, these independent expenditures, is really reprehensible. It's really disgusting in a lot of regards. I've received it. Jeff's received it. I invite him. I invite anyone. I invite the candidates to refute that as well. But you got to be careful. You got to be careful. We have a First Amendment to speak. Okay, and that extends to speech that we don't like, that we hate. Because if we start deciding, well, we don't like this and we don't like this, we're going to be shutting down valuable speech. I think the idea of the freedom of speech is that we can have a marketplace of ideas. And if something's really, truly reprehensible, does that reflect on you, the reader? Does it reflect on, if it's an independent expression, does it reflect on me? What I think it does, it reflects on the people that put it out. So reprehensible speech identifies the people that are having difficulties in our society, and so we can deal with that. So free speech serves a lot of functions, and as much as I don't like all of this stuff, I think it will continue. One other point about this is that the reason that they do it is because it's effective, and that might be something we might want to look into ourselves about. So, but I don't think just passing a law to shut this down, I don't know how we would decide where we draw that line. That's the whole danger of anytime you try to interfere with the First Amendment.
Thank you, Kim. And we have time for a few more questions. Here's a question about childcare, and we will start with Kim. What will you do in your position to improve access to quality, affordable childcare for working families?
Well, this has probably become the #1 issue in my campaign. I never would have anticipated it, but it's actually a critical issue in our communities. Actually, it's a critical issue nationally. But what we've identified and what we have evidence is that the Department of Human Services actually has an agenda to make things difficult on independent providers. They do this with, arbitrary regulations and rules that are not well defined, arbitrary enforcement where they'll come in and they'll just write up a provider with a whole bunch of stuff. And a lot of this stuff has nothing to do with child safety. We all agree that, we need regulation to make sure that our children are safe. But this is things like water spots in the sink, or pokey grass or a plunger in the bathroom. These things are really ridiculous. And the people that do this do it because they love our children for the most part, and if you make things, and they want to take care of kids, if you put a whole big administrative load on them, and then you come down and you slap them with all these punitive decisions and punishments, a lot of independent providers are just saying, well, I don't want to do it. I can't do it anymore. These people are putting their home on the line, putting their life and livelihood on the line, and if we don't do something about this soon, we won't have any rural child care. We won't have any family child care providers anymore. And so what I would intend to do is I'm going to have some serious talks with the Department of Human Services. One of the questions that a candidate gets is which committee would you like to serve on? And I would like to serve on the Department of Human Services. And again, I never would have anticipated that, but there's issues there that need to be dealt with.
Thank you. Jeff?
We live this issue, Genevieve and I, talking about trying to find daycare that's affordable in our community. It's not because we don't want to pay our daycares, it's because we can't find daycare. We've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old at home, and it's a difficulty. And I'll be honest with you, as a city council member, I've actually looked at that, and John's also been a part of this too. In 2013, in the city of St. Peter, we actually conducted a study to try to find out how we get more daycares in our community. And so we did this study, and we invited a whole bunch of people in our community, and what we came to was the fact that we needed to have some resources available that took care of the barriers to entry in getting into the business. And so as a result of us opening up a little bit of money with our EDA, we actually were able to bring 1 center and 5 new in-home daycares to our community. That's a start. That's doing something. As a Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities board member, this is an issue that we've addressed since 2016. The Greater Minnesota Partnership, which is a part of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, realized this was a critical issue in 16 and 17 and 18. In fact, there was a representative from the Rural Policy and Development who was the keynote speaker in 2017 in Alexandria when all of us went to the summer conference of the coalition to talk about issues in Greater Minnesota and how we could address them in the 2018 legislative session. As I said before, we live this issue, but we're not the only ones that live this issue. And frankly, in talking to daycare providers, I've talked to planning, we've talked to our daycare provider, and there are some things we can do to reduce the burden of our daycare providers. But I'm not willing to do anything that's going to cause less safety to cause less safety protocols when it comes to our daycares. I am looking at going to the legislature and doing a whole bunch of different things. But we have to have this done in a bipartisan way. This can't be a Republican issue or a Democrat issue, and they can't be ignoring the Democratic issues at the legislature like they did in 2018 either. We need to work together. This is a greater Minnesota issue. This is a one Minnesota issue.
Thank you. The next question is on education. Do you believe it is reasonable to give federal and state aid money to private schools, such as religious schools, without also requiring those schools to follow the same regulations as other state-supported schools? And Jeff, you will begin.
No, I do not.
Okay, save time. Kim?
Well, constitutionally, by the state constitution, we cannot fund parochial schools. We cannot, pass any money or support them. So that's kind of really a moot issue in that regard. However, as far as tax modifications in relation to education, I think that a way that we might be able to fund some of this, because I see value in parochial schools. I see value in Christian schools. I see value actually in Muslim schools. I think parents should have the choice to have their children educated where they want to have them educated. Again, I don't think one size fits all. One thing that I believe that could be done is every parent pays a portion of their tax that is allocated to education. And I think a parent should have a choice to allocate those dollars, to have those dollars follow their child in education. So that's one step that we could go in this regard. But I want to see a lot more options in education than just, the regular public schools. And I'll be very frank and plain about that.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is, do you support raising the renewable energy standard above to the current 25%, which has been met? And explain why or why not. And Kim, we'll start with you.
Well, this kind of relates to the whole issue of renewable energy in totality anyway. My position on energy policy altogether is the fact that there should be no subsidies and there should be no mandates. I believe that the marketplace should decide what energy sources are out there. I get hit with all the time, well, the petroleum industry is subsidized, well, they're all subsidized, okay? I'd rather see none of them be subsidized and let the market sort it out. We've had pretty good subsidies in renewable energy and solar and wind, and I think it's time to, and then the fuels, the renewable or the biofuels, I think we've had them out for long enough that the people can make a decision whether they're good for them or not. And so I'm in favor of pulling it all off of there and just let the market decide what kind of energy that people prefer to use or can use. If we don't do that, then again, what happens is we artificially manipulate our market, and actually energy costs more. I think that's what we've all seen in our electric bills. All of this renewable energy that we've done is actually increased the price of energy in Minnesota. So I'm for everything on the table kind of a position. Put all of the energy sources on the table, but eliminate the subsidies and eliminate the mandates.
Thank you, Kim. Jeff?
Well, that sounds like a very good way to destabilize the entire economy in our country, and I'm not in favor of that. So that's one way that contrasts us. I am in favor of the renewable energy economy that's sweeping across the country and, in fact, across the world. And I believe there's a necessity in that, and because we have to address man-made climate change. And that's one way to do that. I do believe in the renewable energy standard, but I don't think that's the only solution. I think another idea that we need to talk more about is the idea of carbon capture in the state. There's a lot of carbon that's being emitted into the atmosphere, and how do we recapture that stuff? And maybe use it as an alternative way for a new business model for reuse of that carbon, because they can actually use that in products. I believe it was about 20 years ago in 1998, so keep in mind I was a 10th grader at the time, But there was a legislator, I believe her name was Ann Rest, and she suggested, and Ruth Johnson actually and I had a good conversation about that because she was in the legislature at the same time, this idea of taxing carbon and not jobs. If you're an industry or a captain of industry or a captain of commercial enterprise, and you're releasing carbon emissions into the atmosphere, this will provide an incentive in which we are, in the state of Minnesota, giving less, or we're giving more of a tax break in terms of the employment taxes. If you spend some money to reduce the carbon that goes out into the atmosphere, reduce your carbon footprint. Now, this was 20 years ago, and I don't really know where it's gone, but it's time to dust it off, I think. I think it's time that maybe this legislation was ahead of its time. And I believe the people that were really working on it at the time think that this could go in this economy going forward. So I'm looking forward to having more options and more discussions at the legislature about our renewable energy economy and our carbon economy.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks. All right. And this will, do we have other questions there?
No.
Okay. All right. This will be our last question. Believe it or not. This will be our last question. I'm sorry, whoever wrote this. Next time, please write a little larger. Okay. Because I'm not making fun. It's a very important issue, but. Okay. The Me Too movement has made national attention in the last year. If elected, what do you plan to do to protect women and men from sexual violence in your office, in Minnesota, and here in District 19A? And we will start with Kim. Jeff, okay.
Start with me? Perfect.
Yes, please.
Yeah, the Me Too movement has really shed the light on what's going on with regards to a whole bunch of different things across this country and across the world, unfortunately. I can't go onto the Facebook right now without seeing about 2 or 3 people who are expressing their issues that are going on in their lives at one point or another. They're having their trigger moment and they're talking about the issues. Frankly, I think that that's healthy for them, that they have the opportunity to actually bring to the forefront what's going on in their lives in the past. It's also very terrible that there are that many people that are pointing out things that have happened to them in their lives. I think that in our culture, we need to have a change in how we address people of the opposite sex, and how we take care of the role and the dynamics between the employer and the employee, or that relationship that exists in this country. And so as a legislator, I look forward to having a greater discussion about ways that we can address this. Because it's not just about me and about you, but it's about future generations. And we have it within ourselves to have a good discussion in our country about this now, so we could say enough is enough. We won't tolerate this anymore. And going forward, we won't tolerate this anymore. So that in a generation or 2 generations, maybe we're not even having this discussion anymore. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things that need to be addressed, and there are a lot of people that need to step aside from their careers and their jobs as a result of the accusations that have been lobbied on them. It started about 1.5 years ago with the entertainment industry, and frankly, it's still going now, and it needs to go until everybody has been given their time to either be investigated and found guilty or not. But if anybody's been given the accusations, we have to look at all of the evidence, and we do have to believe the people who are accused. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim?
I'm glad you said we have to believe the people that are accused.
I said accusing, not accused.
Oh, I thought you said accused.
Yeah. You can roll the tape.
Well, then that does bring an issue, okay? Who do we believe, the accused or the accuser? We have a system to deal with this. It's called due process. We have a court system, and the reason that we have that system, it's been, it's brought through our whole culture and our history, came from, I believe it came from England, from the Magna Carta. The reason that we have that, and there's also, in our system, there's called the presumption of innocence. And the reason that we have those, you can't prove a negative. If somebody accuses you of something, you can't necessarily prove you didn't do it. So it puts a person in an impossible situation right there. So I believe that we have a system to deal with this, and we need to put people through due process, and we do have to still retain the presumption of innocence. If we don't, we're going to lose our culture. We're never going to find a way to get along. People's reputations, people's lives will be ruined for false accusations because they're not tried. They're not measured. They're tried in the court of public opinion. So what this does is it puts an imposition on, on a hard person, on the victim. It puts a burden on them. It puts a burden on them to report. And I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying, on either side, because abuse happens both ways. It actually does. But the person that is a victim has a duty to report. Number one, to make sure that justice is done. And number two, to make sure that these people are pulled out of our society, because it's one of the most heinous things that there is, to rape or sexual abuse like that. If we're going to have this situation where we have to listen to accusations without due process, then the only thing that we can appeal to as punishment is freedom of association. Most businesses, if you're accused of sexual abuse within the business, you're hired at will, then you can get fired. If you're accused, if you're accused of something and people don't want to hang around you anymore, then that's another punishment as well. But if you really want to punish people, prosecute them.
Thank you. And we have come to the end of our questions. So we will now move into, each candidate has 2 minutes for a closing statement. And Kim, we will start with you.
Okay, well, I guess you can perceive from our conversation that there are clear differences in our perspective on a lot of things. I think really deep down what it comes to is a difference in perspective. I talked about virtues and values, okay? The highest value that I think that we have in our culture, what made us great, is our freedom and liberty. We need to do whatever we can to protect that. The biggest virtue that I think is individual responsibility. And what happens if we don't come from those perspectives, we're always looking outside of us for resolution of our problems and our issues. The place that we should always look for problems and issues and how to deal with our world is we should look within first and then look without. And try to deal with things at the most local level. And when I say local level, I mean from the individual, the family, the community, which I'm talking about church and civic organizations, before you even look at any form of government. Then look to your cities, your counties, your state, and absolutely as a last resort, the federal government, because the federal government should be involved in our lives very, very, very little, if at all. They should provide for our common defense and negotiation between the states, and very few things actually. And we would have a lot fewer problems right now. We'd have a lot less controversy in our life, in our world, if that were the case.
Thank you.
And I would like your vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
A lot of people ask me why I'm running for the Minnesota House of Representatives. I'm already a representative in the city. And I tell them, being at the legislature, it's not so much about, the partisanship that exists in terms of policies or legislation that we must get done. But really, it's about a number of things. It's about your issues. It's about your dreams, your problems, your future. But most importantly, it's also our children. And I believe that's why we really should be running for the Minnesota House of Representatives, the future. I was born on a farm in Minnesota, and I'm rural raised. And so I bring that perspective to the Minnesota legislature. I've got new ideas because I've seen things happen, and I always wonder, how could things change? How could this be better? Especially when wearing my city council member hat. And especially when going up to the Minnesota legislature and working on behalf of all of us, working across the aisles to work on issues that matter to the most for greater Minnesota. I think the biggest thing that I can say is this. My entire career as an elected official, as a public servant, is this. I listen, I learn, and then I lead. And frankly, we need more of that in our legislature right now. More now than ever, especially with all the partisanship that's going on, without the lack of care or due process for what we want in our individual districts across the state. Now, our representatives have done a very good job. Ruth is in the audience tonight, Ruth Johnson, Terry Morrow, Clark Johnson, have done a very good job of listening to us. They have also not been extreme at their positions. They've never made anybody feel bad because they're different. And I look forward to leading because I think that we ought to include everybody. And we ought to build a coalition of people in our district. And so I'm ready. Send me in, Coach, November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you can, yes. You have my permission. Okay. I want you to remember that you can visit with Kim and with Jeff anytime, right? And particularly after this, this forum. This concludes our forum this evening. The League of Women Voters of St. Peter thanks you for participating. We thank the candidates, Kim Spears, the Republican candidate, and Jeff Brand, the DFL candidate, for sharing their views and for your willingness to try, your willingness to run for office. Thanks also goes to Ed Lee and Helen Baumgartner, to the St. Peter Herald, and to the St. Peter Chamber for co-sponsoring this. And thank you, yes, to me. We're done.
Yep.